Welcome to this session, which will provide background and guidance on how to use the Children and Young People's Mental Health System Maturity Tool. My name is Sarah Wright and I'm an Improvement Advisor with the Mental Health System Improvement Team. So just before I describe the structure of this session, I want to say that I will be referring predominantly to the Children and Young People's Mental Health System Maturity Tool as the tool. This is for brevity. It's going to take me way too long to keep repeating that, and I don't want that to lose the message. So if I say the tool, please see that as synonymous with the Children and Young People's Mental Health System Maturity Tool. So within this session, I intend to inform you of the background that has driven the development of the tool and the goals that we're hoping to achieve by using it. I'll consider the purpose, limitations and scope of the tool and describe the structure of domains, elements and KLOEs which are so critical to how it's set up. I'm going to talk about 9 of the elements that we feel are crucial to get in place first, as these provide a foundation to build on. I'm going to show you live how to use the tool, showing you how to complete the scoring and from that how to develop an improvement plan. And lastly, I will describe some of the outputs delivered from completing the CYP Mental Health System Maturity Tool. Now, the only last thing I want to note is that we've realised that some of the functionality of this tool doesn't work if you're using Office 2010 or earlier. So you need to be using Office 2013 or later for all the extra tables to work. Now, before we look in more detail at the System Maturity Tool, I thought it would be useful to give you a little bit of background so you understand the context for why this System Maturity Tool has been developed. So the Mental Health System Improvement Team has an ongoing interest in considering the domains and elements which ensure children and young people's mental health systems are optimised. Our usual approach is through diagnostic reviews. These involve site visits for a couple of days where we aim to deeply understand the local offer, write a report which then recommends improvement actions most likely to enhance the system. Over the last year, we've completed over 20 children and young people's mental health system reviews and recognise that there are some recurrent themes and we wanted to be able to share these more widely. At the same time as this happening, the National Policy Team has set up a work stream focusing on optimising children and young people's mental health services. Within the steering group, there's been lots of discussion and interest about what are those critical elements that really make a difference and really ensure that children and young people's mental health services are optimised. And I want to note here that when the policy team and also when we describe this within the System Maturity Tool, when we talk about optimising, we're not talking about efficiencies. We're talking here about the best use of staff time in the service to meet the mental health needs of children and young people. So with these two things happening, we're all thinking about how we can optimise the service. The Mental Health System Improvement Team developed the System Maturity Tool over the last 9 months, and we did this through work with good practice visits, through diagnostic reviews, through collaboration with 4-week trailblazer sites, 12 of those across the country, and through some critical reflection within the team. And this has all been pulled together through a structured research project to formalise the tool which you now have access to. I want to recognise at this point that we understand that we're in a very privileged position of being able to see how multiple systems work and to learn from the amazing work that's happening across the country. We also know that when you're working in a provider or a CCG, that you'll have in-depth knowledge and understanding of your local system, but you are not afforded that helicopter view that we have over many systems. So we really hope that this Children and Young People's Mental Health Systems Maturity Tool will provide you with that systematic overview of the sort of key elements that we see across the country that really improve the offer. Lastly, I want to just note that the work that's happening in the Midlands, where all the SDPs have signed up to complete the System Maturity Tool to do a region-wide pilot. So hopefully after hearing about the background and context, this purpose of the CYP System Maturity Tool will be quite self-evident. It's really set up to be a structured framework and process to review children and young people's mental health and emotional wellbeing services. It's designed to provide information to aid improvement activity through critical self-reflection of a series of domains, elements, with the support of some key lines of inquiry that I'm going to describe to you in more detail shortly. Some of the limitations of the tool is that we acknowledge that the tool is not fully comprehensive. The learning around children and young people's mental health systems is developing all the time. What we do know, however, is that the domains and critical elements described in this tool do provide a really strong starting point. We've not visited any system in the country that's managed to achieve the majority even of the key elements described in this tool. So we think that this is a great point to support the learning and improvement activity across the country. We also want to acknowledge that it's important to say this is not an assurance tool. It's been set up to aid thinking about what improvement activity is most important to your system, and also to support a comprehensive review of the improvement opportunities. So don't expect that this will provide assurance that that's being delivered. Lastly, because this has all been developed over the last year, I want to provide for you an email address, and that's given on this sheet here, but is also in the actual improvement tool, where you can contact us at the Mental Health System Improvement Tool. You can contact us either to get advice about how to use the tool, or to give us some feedback if you think there's something that would be useful to share. Now next, I just want to quickly give an overview of the scope of the tool. It's aimed at community services only and excludes inpatient or residential services. And the tool's been developed to cover the whole community system offer for children and young people mental health systems. So this is thinking a lot more widely. It's not a CAMS tool. This is really about thinking about that whole system offer for children and young people in your community. And therefore, we'd want the completion of this to be viewed as a partnership and collaborative activity between commissioners, NHS providers and non-NHS providers, including third sector and local authority. And lastly, obviously, we really think that those people who use services, carers, parents and young people, should be involved in this review if they can be. We know that this is really critical to have them at the heart of the way services are designed and improved. Now, because of this sort of collaborative nature of what we're asking here, we've been put in a requirement that we'd expect the completion of this to be a real joint approach with all providers, commissioners and other partners within that system. And the reason we ask for this is because it's been a regular reflection from diagnostic reviews that one of the greatest learning from those 2-day site visits is that that's really brought everyone together to have shared discussions and improvement conversations that haven't normally happened. So we'd suggest then that the whole process is really driven by the STP level to allow that maximum development and collaborative opportunity. We also say that stakeholders should be of a sufficiently senior level to make things happen, and this process should be as inclusive as possible. So now I'm going to talk to you about the sort of high-level structure of the maturity tool. This is these 10 domains. Now, I'm going to describe each of those and give a bit of a summary so that you can sort of get the context around and the concept of what's within each of these. And what you'll see within the maturity tool is then we talk about elements that are needed to make up this sort of overarching good practice indicator statement. So the first domain is around strategy and sustainability. That's really thinking about the clear vision that you have for your locality, how you're joined up, and it is about how you're working together as a system-wide collaborative. We have a domain on the model. Thrive's a model you've probably all heard of, but there are lots of different ways to really develop a model that's bespoke to your locality. And within this domain, we give some guidance on some of the critical factors we'd expect to see within that. There's an increasing and ongoing pressure, rightly, around access and weights. We know that we're still not seeing as many children and young people within our systems as we need to. So really thinking about what are the most critical elements that are needed to be in place to make sure our offer at the beginning is as timely and quick as possible. Now, the next domain is called practice based on best available evidence. This was changed actually quite recently. We used to call that evidence-based practice, but what we recognise in children and young people services is that quite a lot of the offer isn't got nice compliant guidance to it. So it really is then about what you find is the practice that's based on the best available evidence. And we talk a bit about that. We think about outcomes as well, about how you're generating more information to understand what the best offer is. There's a section on workforce. This is really about having a sufficient workforce. We know there's issues and concerns around sustainability going forward and the need to develop new roles to make sure we've got that sustainable workforce in place. The next section on involvement and participation has been generated with support of the Amplified project run by Young Minds. So trying to think about what are those key elements that you need to have in place to make sure that you've got equitable and meaningful involvement and participation from children, young people and their parents and carers. Now we have a domain on productivity, and we know that the term productivity can be quite a turn off to clinicians. What we're recognising in this one is, although when we talk about optimising, which we were doing at the beginning, that's really about how all these 10 domains work together is when we're talking about optimising. But productivity is really thinking about some of those very clear, tangible activities that can take place that really support improved offer to children, being able to use your resource to the maximum benefit. There's things like capacity and demand work, job planning, thinking about different methodologies, about lean, about, how can we make sure that we use the funding and the resource we've got to make sure the most children can be seen from these services. We have a domain focusing on outcomes, and this is about how outcomes are used at every level, so they need to be clinically meaningful, but how does that generate all the way through to make sure that services are built on what we know provides the best outcomes. We have a domain focusing on data and informatics, so this is firstly about the gathering of data, flowing data to the MHSDS, but also about how, in the informatics element, how are reports used to make sure that there's a real cycle of learning and that we're all the time trying to work out how we can continue to optimise and develop our children's systems. And the last one is culture. Now we know there's so much work done to show that culture shift that's needed sometimes to make us more comfortable with shorter episodes of care, thinking about more positive risk taking, about how we manage innovation and support innovation within our systems. So we really put a bit of effort as well into thinking about what culture would be really helpful to your children and young people's mental health system. So now we've thought about the 10 domains, we're now going to think about some of the layers that go underneath that. So underneath the domains we've got elements, and there are 61 elements in total in the tool, of which these are split between 3 and 8 under each of the domains. And these elements collectively should cover all the parts required to achieve the domain goal. Then under each of the elements there is a drop down which gives key lines of inquiry. And these questions are really there to support your thinking about the element. And they're written in very positive language. So if you recognise you've not got something in place, that may indicate an improvement activity you could take forward. And lastly, there's a self-rating option for each of the elements so that then you can get an overall picture within this framework of where your improvement needs most lie and where you're more successful. You'll also see when you look in the System Maturity Tool that 9 of the elements are noted in bold. And they're bold because we see those as foundation elements, which when in place will facilitate the improvement of other elements. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier was this collaborative nature of how we'd want you to approach the System Maturity Tool. And for that, we think you need an STP delivery vehicle, which has operational subgroups underneath it. And if that isn't in place, we question whether some of the improvement activity you're aiming to deliver across your system is likely to be successful. But we certainly know you're going to struggle to really engage with some of the opportunities within this System Maturity Tool. So what we recognise is if those groups are set up correctly, they're often well placed to review specific domains within the tool and generate improvement actions. Now this slide shows in more detail those nine elements that we think are critical to look at first. And what I recognise is when thinking about 61 elements and all the different asks that are within this tool, that focusing on these 9 is a really positive place to start. And if we just talk through what these ones are about, so there's 5 of those that are under strategy and sustainability. The first one is about having a clear vision, and this is about how your local transformation plan or plans, depending on the size of your SDP, come together to really give a vision for how you're going to improve your children and young people's mental health services. It's also about having a governance structure and how that's set up, and I'm going to give an example of that in the next slide. It's having a delivery vehicle to both review and monitor and operationally develop the system-wide delivery of children and young people's mental health services. And like I said, this is because we so regularly hear that the coming together as a collaborative across the system has such a powerful benefit. Then the last 2 are about having clear leads in place. And then around access and weights, there's 3 elements that we think are really critical. One is that the Commissioner has commissioned services to, and they explicitly understand their contribution to meet local need and deliver the access standard. So that's about having a really strategic view over your systems and how you've spent your money there. The next one is about having a high quality system-wide access policy. Now this is a lot harder to achieve than the one line implies. Because actually to get all those systems to come together around, if you have a single point of access or some central route to make sure that children and young people have an easy access into services is really key. So getting that set up we see as a really critical element. And the last one is about having a process to have some review of common cause problems that are impacting on flow, to think about how that can be brought together across the STP. And we've heard a number of examples when we've been visiting sites where there's been challenges or families have found different elements difficult in the service, and then it's about bringing that together really so that some ideas can be generated and improvement opportunities. And the last one is about the key performance indicators that are in place, and we give some guidance within here on what should be the critical ones that are in there. We see some services that have got hundreds of different KPIs, but they're not really that helpful, some that have got very few. So this is a description of what would be a sensible, optimised list of KPIs for a mental health system. Okay, so we've said that we don't think that this maturity tool will be that helpful without you having a system in place. So this is noted within the tool as an assumption, and we assume that you have got that appropriate CYP mental health system-wide meeting structure set up. This is an example that we've put on the screen of how you could set your structure up. It is just an example. There's lots of different systems across the country, and if you feel that the way that you've got your governance structure over your STP-wide children and young people's mental health services is really successful, don't change it to look like this. So it's just recognising, does your governance structure and your systems meet what we've described here. So what we're saying is, as system-wide leadership, we'd expect there to be a transformation steering group, and this to really think about your vision, to sort of focus on that strategy and sustainability element of the domains, and to really think about how we drive forward the model. You'd expect there to be a clinical reference group attached to that, just to make sure that the thinking within that is also really clinically focused. And then some of the operational leadership we'd expect to see in place. And these are the three groups that we most regularly hear are required. The first one is around system pathways. So that would really align with the practice based on best available evidence. And this is thinking about the real journey for children and young people. So if the system in your area includes some third sector partners as well as some NHS services, what's the journey like for those children? How does the pathways across the whole system work effectively together? We also know that there's real challenges around workforce across many systems. So having a group that really thinks about workforce, who've got the opportunity then to review that domain and to think about what are the sustainability of the workforce, of the new roles that could be developed in partnership with third sector organisations. And the last one that regularly comes up is around data and IT systems. We know there's often a challenge to small third sector organisations in flowing information to the MHSDS. This is an area where you can look at. It also does impact quite a lot on outcomes as well. But this is, like I said, it's an example structure. The steering group should have representatives from all the system providers in CCG, and we'd expect that to really report into a suitable board. And this clinical reference group providing scrutiny for change, for system changes, and to sign off shared system approaches. So now we're going to move to a live demonstration of the System Maturity Tool. So here we are within the System Maturity Tool, and you'll notice that these areas of purpose, scope, requirements, assumptions and limitations I've already talked through with you. The next sheet gives you some further guidance on how to complete the tool. Now I'm going to show you how to use this live, so we'll just notice this at the moment. So there's some instructions about scoring there, and then there's some detail about how you can find all the different layers within this tool. And again, I'm going to show you this live, but then you know that there's reference to that there. And then at the bottom of this slide, this sheet is also the 10 domains that we've already talked through. Okay, we're now going to think in a little bit more detail about each of the domains. Now these each have a sheet each, so you can see these are all these 10 domains I've already described to you across the bottom. At the moment we're in the domain for strategy and sustainability. And what you can see there is those 5 elements that we've already noted earlier that were in bold that we see as foundation elements. But what I want to look at before we start to think about those is about what all these extra pluses are that are around the edge. So the first one I want to click on is next to the domain name at the top. And if I click on that, what is revealed is a slide that describes some of the thinking behind that domain. So this includes some of the key elements you need to know about. So for strategy and sustainability, obviously that's going to be very much related to children and young people's mental health policy. So you can see there's the future in mind, 5-year forward and long-term plan. There's a statement there which is really to try and give the focus of that domain. So the statement that's given there is from the NHS CYP Mental Health Policy Team, who acknowledge that delivering the quality and level of mental health support described in the NHS long-term plan requires sophisticated partnership working and planning by the wide range of commissioners, providers and voluntary sector organisations who support children and young people. So a statement really that says why we know that's a challenge. And on the other side is a statement written to describe what it would look like if things were working well. So this is written really in positive language so that you can see what you're aspiring to achieve, what the vision is of where we'd like you to get to. We've also referenced there that's the NHS change model, and anything that's shown on that page is a link given to where you can access that. So each one of our domains in here equally has this area set up. So there's the one for the model around access. What you'll see in there is that one is connected to the increasing offer that we're expecting to see around children's mental health services. Around evidence-based practice, there's obviously quite a large focus on NICE and about the way that that's set up, but really is thinking about that practice based on best available evidence is really the combination of research, values and clinical expertise. Around workforce, we've got there a description of some of those bodies that really are critical, and what the King's Fund says about how we've got challenges around keeping a suitably qualified and skilled workforce. Around involvement, this work around participation and the participation ladder is a really positive way, a really interesting way to think about how well you've really embedded that culture of participation within your service. And again, some of this is through our learning from thinking with young minds. I'm going to talk just a little bit more about this productivity slide, because this one, we referenced this earlier, that when we think about productivity, what does that mean? And I've made that reference to that in the way that this is described in this slide. So optimising children and young people's mental health systems involves all domains of the maturity tool, but that there are, however, specific actions to ensure unwarranted variation is reduced and therefore clinical activity is maximised. What we really want is there's many hours of clinical time to be able to be devoted to seeing those children and young people who need to be accessing our services. Some of the key things, though, when we think about productivity around capacity and demand, around job planning, are really recognised in a lot of what Lord Carter writes about when he talks about the challenge of unwarranted variation and about how we need to really dig into this in mental health services. And the other area that really drives some of the thinking around this is that the national benchmarking position for traditional CAMS has been found to be less than 2 contacts per day. So that's a really low level of contact rate that we're seeing within services. There's a slide here again describing what we would expect to see around outcomes, some of the guidance that's really helpful from Cork, and again links are there for that. Around data and informatics, we describe there some of the vision for what a tech-driven NHS should look like, and some of what NHS England describes why good data management is really critical. And the last area, we think a lot more about the work of Michael West and the work he's done with the King's Fund to think about what are those really 6 critical factors that play a part in having a really good culture within a service. And we know how powerful that is from a lot of the Berwick reports. And there's also the leadership position there that's given from the Leadership Academy. Okay, so we've talked about this plus at the top, and that in each one you've got this extra guidance. So we're now going to think a little bit more about these elements. So we've said there's 7 elements here for strategy and sustainability, and each one has got a plus next to it. So I'm going to use this one as an example. So within here, this 1.3 is about having your delivery vehicle, and then underneath the KLOEs are really some questions to try and help you think in more detail about what that should look like. So is it STP wide? Is it a strategic meeting including CCGs and all system partners? Has it got subgroups to operationally address issues arising from the shared transformation? Do the subgroups have clear operational system-wide grip on the development of flow across needs-led pathways, shared data systems and sustainable workforce? So those 3 themes we've already noted earlier. Is there CYP mental health system awareness and monitoring of access and outcomes performance? And are parents and carers represented at part of this system-wide transformation? So I've added in a word, I've put governance strong there, so that may be something that you might want to think about. You might say that's where we feel we're quite comfortable with that. But then you might think, well, we haven't got parents and children and young people present, so that's an improvement area we'd like to develop. And at this point, we'd encourage you to open this one. So in here, you can add CYP and parents to join steering group. Maybe an action that you want to take forward. That's just, you can obviously put a lot more than that into there, but what I'm trying to basically describe is how you can fill this in through making notes of what things you're happy with, but then also thinking about what you want improvements on. No one's going to mark you on this. This is just very much just trying to help your thinking. So then we come to your scoring, and this is a self-scoring position, and we either got that there's nothing in place, so you don't think you've got any delivery vehicle, there's not a structure there, it's unlikely that any of you are going to say that, that you've got a fair position, so you might have some provider-led meetings but nothing that really brings things together as a system, a good position where you're comfortable that you've got a STP delivery vehicle, very good, it's quite established, it's quite robust, been through that sort of storming and norming phase, or best practice. Best practice is really an example that where you think other systems could learn a considerable amount from what you've done. So this is where you've not only had your system set up in that way, but where you've really embedded it and refined it and got it to a place where it's got opportunity for others to learn from. So then I'm going to score this though at fair. And like we said before, that if we look in the guidance, this is where it describes what that scoring system means. So that's how we fill that in. In each one of these areas, everyone has different KLOEs underneath so that you can really think in more detail. This again is some of these ones that we've got that are in bold, so ones that we see are key, and you'll see that all the way through the whole tool. Now I'm not going to go through all of them because that's part of really the experience of working through the tool. But what I want to think about next is about the improvement scoring. Okay, so we've known how to score an element and we've been through that. So there's the element we were looking at, 1.3, and we'd scored that as fair. Now when we were thinking about that, we'd come up with some initial improvement ideas, and if you click on the plus at the top there, they come through. So those rough ideas are pulled through to help you with your action planning. You'll notice that there's an opportunity there to filter, so you can filter around, so fair and nothing, they're the ones that we've coloured in bold because they're the ones that we'd obviously encourage you to focus on first. Again, you can see that 1.3 is still there, which scores as fair, and our improvement idea was that children, young people, parents to join steering group. So if we put in an action that young minds group to be asked to join steering group to get young people present, and who's going to be the owner or the leader? Well, if we say it's me, and we've already got a date in, you'll notice once that's done, that changes the tone, so it goes to a not as bold a tone, and that's because you've got an action in place. Now obviously you can close this back up if you want to, so you can just see your actions, you can filter in whichever way you choose to filter, and so that then you can see all these actions together and who the leaders are for those. And I just want to go back to that one again. So if we go back to 1.3 in strategy, you can see that there are also these opportunities to rescore. And we've got 3 opportunities there. Now you'll see that they're not always scored every time that there's been a review. So there may be that you choose at one point that you just review one element of the tool, or you may just look at certain elements at that point. What will happen is that the improvement tool will always look at the last score you had. So for this one it was fair because we had no other rescorings afterwards. So if we add in a rescoring saying that, right, we've taken that action, we've moved to good, and we go back to that improvement plan, you'll see that that's pulled straight through. So the last bit, just to note about how we do the scoring, is that there is a feedback slide at the back, and this shows you from the original baseline position, which is the one that's nearest to the elements, to your latest rescore, what the position has been. And so you can see that in a spidergram, and you can see your improvement. This also shows in numbers the sort of domain position of we score 4 as being good position, so this gives you an overall position of where you were at different dates. And at the bottom there's a graph which shows area of greatest needs. They're the ones that have scored 0, so that you can see if maybe if one of those domains is a particular hotspot for you, that really should highlight that there. So that concludes really showing you the tool live. It's relatively straightforward to approach. So I just want to clarify some of the goals and outputs of the CYP System Maturity Tool and what we're hoping you're all going to gain from using this. So firstly, it was to share learning about key elements to a wider audience than is possible through diagnostic reviews. So we're hoping that this will be helpful in understanding the way that children and young people's mental health services are developing. It was to provide more direct improvement support rather than focus being on diagnostic reviews, so it will change some of the focus of our work within the system improvement team. It can give a system and regional position against a consistent and tested framework, so regional heat maps can be developed. And this is an area where we think it's got a real opportunity to support improvement plans. So that would be our next goal, is we would hope that through the use of this system maturity tool, a region-wide improvement plan can be generated, which is based off that framework of need that's been shown by local services. And obviously we really hope that the offer to children and young people will be improved by this improvement to children and young people's mental health systems. So the outputs we'd expect to see is an improvement plan generated by each SDP, which is comprehensive and systematic, that we can generate heat maps from collating results from SDPs against the elements described in the CYP Mental Health System Maturity Tool, and that this offers an opportunity for the mental health system improvement team and clinical networks to focus our improvement activity against a defined need. And it's a chance to rescore in the future, so that really gets a chance for us to see the impact of our improvement activity. So just to conclude then, what have we talked through in this session? We've described the detail, the purpose and the scope of the CYP Mental Health System Maturity Tool. I've taught you through those 10 domains, 61 elements and the KLOEs that are there on that plus under every different element within the tool. We've talked about those 9 elements which are seen as foundation elements to consider first, and that we've encouraged you to think about those as the starter for using this tool. I've given an overview of how the whole system maturity tool is set up, how we've got slides giving best practice, the way that that generates a scoring system, and ultimately how you can generate an improvement plan for your CYP mental health system. And we've described some of those outputs about how you can then work with other areas. I suppose one of the last areas I'd like to note is that I would really hope that there'll be lots of areas that will be able to showcase some of the positive work that's happening across the system. And when we get those really good practice areas demonstrated, we'll be able to look at collaboratives across regions so that we can share some of that great work. So that concludes this session. Thank you very much.